Okay, I think we're ready. I think we're ready to do this. Absolutely. Uh, let's turn down the music here. Switch the cameras. I think I'm ready. I think I'm all set. Welcome to the Thomas Miller Show. My name is Thomas Miller. It's a pleasure to be with you on this August 2nd, 2023. If you want to be a part of the show, you can. You can do that via commenting in the comment section below, or you can use one of my socials up at the top here, right chair, and you can follow that right where it says Texas suspect accused of killing kitten during argument. Weird, but there you go. My socials will be running up there, so check that out. Also, you can email me directly, thomasmiller@thomasmillershow.com, or you can call me inside the studio. The number is 562-337-9619. You can help me out by sponsoring the show, and you can do that a number of ways. Buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/tmshow, or you can go to my Patreon, which is there, and or you can go directly to Venmo. All the links are in the description down below. All right, guys. I've been away for a couple days. Took a little bit of a break just to unwind a little bit. And today's show is going to go very different. I thought that I would do the norms, cover a little bit in the news, and I will do it, but segue into a story that I quite frankly did not have any idea existed. I didn't even know this was part of history. I just barely scratched the surface, and what I uncovered is pretty crazy, especially for a black man. I did not know that this was going on. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but first, I want to tell you about these two books. This one, there you go. Can I turn it? Let's see. Make sure I get it just right. Okay, this one's the Deep State Encyclopedia. The lights on there just too much, but it's the Cabal's Playbook. It's by a young lady by the name of Really Graceful. You got to check this book out. It's got everything you need to know. It is truly an encyclopedia exploring the Cabal's Playbook. You got to get that. I mentioned it on one of my last shows, but I will mention it again. In fact, I got a weird email, and it's funny how people, they don't listen to the show, they just see a picture and they're like, "Oh my gosh." But this is a book by Annie Jacobsen, Operation Paperclip: The Secret Intelligence Program That Brought Nazi Scientists to America. Two books that you got to check out: the Deep State Encyclopedia and Operation Paperclip. Tell me what you think about those books, and then we'll go from there. All right, so let's go with the first story that's in the news that it's pretty crazy, because on my last show, I believe I told you about how COVID is making a comeback, and in my humble opinion, I really think that they may try to lock us down again. I really do. All signs are pointing to that, but look, I am not a fortune teller. I'm not in the know. I am just speculating, and I'm admitting that I'm speculating, so you could take that with a grain of salt, but I do think there's going to be another lockdown coming before you know it, possibly at the end of this year, because they say the cases of COVID are coming up. There's people getting sick. There's more cases of it. In fact, I was talking to my brother today, and he was telling me how his office, the COVID cases oddly have started to increase to the point that they're even thinking about, hey, you know what, we might want to take another look at this thing. And the reason why I bring this up, because, and let's change the scenes for you. CBS this morning had a story covering something that's happening in Florida. Oh, actually, wrong one. Sorry about that. This is what I need. This is from um, Live Now from Fox. This was reported, and this is the second or third story I've seen about this. But let's go ahead and give it a play so you can know what I'm talking about. It's talking about leprosy.
This right now, we're going to be joined by Fox 35 Orlando reporter Deborah Cho. She spoke with a dermatologist about these specific cases. She joins me now. Deborah, good to think that's been around since what? Biblical times. What more did this dermatologist tell you?
Yeah, that's exactly my first question to him, actually, Andrew, was this is kind of freaky to think about. You don't think about headlines when you, health headlines. When you see leprosy, you're like, wait a second, I'm going to stop in my tracks. But what he told me was that it's nothing to freak out about. He says that there is a lot more.
Here's a problem. You know what? Let me just stop it real quick before we get into the meat of this particular report. I really don't like when they say there's nothing to be alarmed of, because what happens is there is reason to be alarmed. When you say the word leprosy, you think, oh my goodness, toes falling off, skin lesions. You might have a nose fall off. Stay away from me. Don't be out in the general public. So when you say there's a leprosy epidemic in Central Florida, and you say, but don't be alarmed. It's unbelievable how these people react.
More treatment than there was, perhaps back in the biblical times. But some of the things that he did say was that he's not sure exactly how it's spreading and why Brevard County specifically is a hot spot.
Leprosy is a disease you don't often think about, but for Floridians, it's something to be aware of. The CDC publishing a new report showing a rise in cases of leprosy, especially in Brevard County.
Okay, so I told you about the COVID thing, and quite frankly, I don't trust the CDC. I don't trust the World Health Organization. I don't trust our government when it comes to this. I don't trust any official. We know that the COVID-19 virus was out of a Wuhan lab in China, and we know that they messed up with this first test pilot program to control us, to control the masses. And now they've put before us, we now have to worry about leprosy. This comes a week later when they said, you know what, the cases of COVID are going up and there's a new strain of COVID that we have to watch out. But here's what they also said about the COVID. But there's nothing to be worried about because we don't know how that COVID is. And now they're saying this about leprosy. Remember, these people want order, and I use that term loosely, very loosely, when you're talking about these heartless people. They want order out of chaos. So they want to cause fear and pandemic and pandemonium, but they don't want you to freak out while they tell you to freak out and take a vaccine. But there's nothing to worry about. Be calm, take your vaccine, put on your mask, and we're going to lock you down. But there's nothing to worry about here. In fact, we don't even know, but do all this stuff and we don't know. And when you use a disease like leprosy, and then you're going to say, well, we don't know how it spreads. I'm not even a doctor. And I know leprosy comes from bodily fluids, airborne particles. That's why you can't, in biblical days, it was so contagious that if you had leprosy, you had to go live out beyond the gates. You had to go live out beyond the walls because it was so dangerous. Leprosy would actually get in the very fibers of one's house. It's amazing what the Bible covers, and it's amazing in what detail the Bible covers to pinpoint accuracy. So when you use a disease like
that I can think of, in fact, we don't even really know how leprosy is spread from one person to another.
Central Florida accounted for 81% of cases.
So when you say you don't know how leprosy is spread, that again, it's spread by contact. In biblical times, you can fact check me, according to the Bible, they would separate the people. So obviously it's either airborne, direct contact, or by bodily fluid. Either way, leprosy is highly contagious.
Reported in the state. In 2020, Brevard County had 20 cases, compared to other counties with leprosy, which had just one. The big question on people's minds, how do you get it? For some people, they have no idea. But in most cases, it's from long-time exposure to leprosy or by making contact with an armadillo.
The one thing that's important to note for our viewers is it's not like shaking somebody's hand is going to give you leprosy.
It absolutely will give you
Dr.
leprosy.
Matthew Knight says oftentimes the disease is a smoldering process. It doesn't just appear in your body overnight. And if you do get it, it's treatable.
It doesn't, kill you quickly. It's not like something you catch and you get sick right away. It's a smoldering disease, and now we're on the lookout for it even more than we normally were.
And another interesting fact that I found, Andrew, when I was talking to Dr. Knight was that he said most of us actually have natural immunity to leprosy. It really all depends on how your immune system responds.
And how do you know that? How do you know that we have an immune system that is ready to resist leprosy? See, these are a lot of questions, and I know some of you out there are probably going to think, here's Thomas, he's spreading his conspiracy theories. But as you know, if you've followed this channel and you've followed other stories, I always say question, ask these questions. And actually that is really been increased by Charlie, the contributor to the show. And really, I was already questioning things, but Charlie says, no, question everything. Like, you have to literally question everything. And so this is me going deep dive with just what she just said. In fact, let me back it up so you can hear what she just said about us having an immunity to it already. Let's back it up a little bit. Okay.
You do get it, it's treatable.
It doesn't, kill you quickly. It's not like something you catch and you get sick right away. It's a smoldering disease, and now we're on the lookout for it even more than we normally were.
And another interesting fact that I found, Andrew, when I was talking to Dr. Knight was that he said most of us actually have natural immunity to leprosy. It really...
So again, how do you know we have natural immunity to leprosy? Now, I was a kid in the 70s, and I remember when the vaccine push was going on. You had vaccines against, number one, polio, measles, mumps, a chickenpox vaccine. And when you have a vaccine, this is just my basic knowledge of vaccines, but there's a weaker part of that disease that you're trying to treat, and you're exposed to it, and hopefully your body will build up immunities to it. So here's my question. If this interesting fact that she found out, we have a natural immunity to leprosy, since they brought it up, I didn't, but I'm glad they did. When you're talking biblical terms, and leprosy was highly contagious back then, and you tell me it's not contagious, people can't get it by touching, when that's so not true. Did you inject us? Did you inject a portion of the population with leprosy, with the leprosy virus? I wish I had it in front of me. Charlie also shared with me an interesting fact that there is a dormant disease inside the COVID vaccine, which potentially could be activated at a later date. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm not canceling it out by any means. I am not throwing it by the wayside. So by me saying that, and what if the leprosy disease is dormant, and could it be ramped up? So you're going to get outbreaks of leprosy because it's been dormant inside our bodies for so long, and now they can wake it up. These are just questions. And why after the pandemic are we gearing up for another pandemic so soon? How close are we to another pandemic? But let's continue with this broadcast.
It all depends on how your immune system responds to it if you do come into contact with it. And if you do catch it, it just depends on how your immune system responds. So different symptoms, different signs will be for different people. So, even though we're hearing these, terms of leprosy and we're freaking out, it sounds like, we shouldn't be in the panic mode quite yet. It's just something to be aware of course, if you are out and about, or if you get to rash, maybe go to the dermatologist a little quicker than you normally would.
Okay,
back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, Deborah, just about that, the symptoms, is it just this rash that first forms? That's how you kind of somewhat know before you get to a doctor that this could be the start of leprosy? What more do we know, though, about those symptoms, if any?
Yeah, every case is different is really what he told me. Some people, they'll start to get a little bit of a rash, maybe see some white bumps, he says, and they'll usually just overlook it and be like, oh, it's just a rash, no big deal. But for some people, they started to maybe not feel like feelings in their legs, and they go to the doctor and they're like, I don't understand what's going on. They keep going to different doctors. Eventually they end up at a dermatologist, and that's when the dermatologist goes, oh no, wait, this is probably a classic case of leprosy.
Okay.
And they'll
and again, this is crazy to me. My mind is actually going crazy right now because this is insane. If there is leprosy out there, it is highly contagious. This is what the media does, and this is so not true. That's why I tell you guys, you need to read your Bibles. You really do. You really need to read your Bibles. I'm not telling you what to do, but I am strongly encouraging you to read your Bible, because there's a reason why the Bible talks about leprosy, not just for that period of time. And there's an extensive portion of the Bible that deals with leprosy. Is that a coincidence? I think not. I don't think that's a coincidence. In fact, I know that's not a coincidence. So if you do have this, or you think that you may, or you just want to know, read the Bible. And then you could treat it. Now, do we have stuff that could probably help us treat cases of leprosy now? Absolutely. I really do believe that. But how do you know what leprosy looks like? If that lesion that you have could be mistaken for a pimple, I don't know. And you think, okay, it's just a pimple, I'm just going to ignore it. Then you start, it starts whatever. It starts doing its leprosy thing. Then you start to lose feeling. At the point that where you start to lose feeling, I'm almost saying that it's possibly too late. Is the leprosy curable? Do we know? There's a lot of questions, and this is designed to create panic. But I'm going to take a play out of their playbook, a page out of their playbook. I'm going to tell you not to panic. I'm going to tell you read your Bible. I'm going to tell you to pray. Do that first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all things will be added unto you. I really firmly believe that with every fiber of my being. But there's a reason why they're reporting cases of leprosy. There is a reason. What that reason is, I don't know. But I do know that leprosy at its raw form creates division. You have to be separated. You have to be away from everybody else. And that's why this is a lie when they say, oh, you can't get it just by touching people. Really? I don't know. Let's finish off this news report.
Immediately get them to an infectious disease doctor, and then that doctor will give them antibiotics, and they're usually treated, pretty quickly. And also it depends on how fast your immune system responds. It could be anywhere from a year or even a couple years until you're officially considered a cure from leprosy.
Interesting.
I think the word endemic is so crucial in this story because it is just right now centered on Central Florida. From what we have been reading or reporting, it has not spread to, I believe, other states where it could potentially become some type of epidemic about all this. How did it start in Central Florida?
So here we are. We're getting a little taste of the Wuhan type thing right here in Central Florida. That's a great question. I am glad that he asked that. Why Central Florida? Why a disease that has been dormant for thousands of years is now rearing its ugly head? These are questions that we need to ask. I'm going to digress just for a little bit. Like, I believe it's Logan Air Force Base, where they're buying up all the property. We got to ask the question, why are you buying up all the property? What is going on? What is our government not telling us? And yes, you can say I've jumped off the deep end. Thomas, you need to come back. I'm asking these questions. And if someone can help me out, please let me know in the comment section down below. But why Central Florida? And why has this highly infectious disease, don't let them trick you, this is a highly infectious disease, why is it just now rearing its ugly head? And if it's true and it is not as contagious as it was in biblical times, that tells me, I don't care, this is one of those things I take a hard stance, that tells me someone's been toying around with this. Someone's been genetically modifying this. There's a reason. I firmly believe that every disease that we know of is literally in a disease vault somewhere, just waiting for research to be done on it or to be released on the general population. Because ultimately, it's all about control. They want to control us. They want to control the population. So it doesn't surprise me that this has been released. I think it's a controlled release. And if they say it's not contagious, that means they've altered it. For what reason?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was like, do we have more armadillos than, other parts of the...
It's another thing. They brought in the armadillos. How many people play with armadillos? For reals. Don't text me or call me if you play with armadillos. That's fine. What do I always say? A broken clock is right twice a day. I get it. Some people do play with armadillos. But really, how many people play with armadillos to the fact that you could get leprosy? Unbelievable.
The country? I mean, is it our heat? Like, what is it? And they say it's still too soon to know. But they also noted to me that, Florida, for whatever reason, is a hot spot right now. And they also mentioned Hawaii. And I said, well, wait a minute, the weather, does that, maybe have something to do? And they said it's not exactly clear right now. So don't know why Florida happens to be a hot spot, but here we go. It is.
Right. All right, Fox 35 Orlando's Deborah Cho there in the Live Now newsroom in Orlando. Deborah, thanks so much. Talk again.
And that is the question. Why Central Florida? And after thousands of years of dormancy, now, of course, again, a broken clock is right twice a day. I get it. And maybe there is a form of leprosy that pops up every so often. Things happen. But why this endemic in Florida? Why these 30 cases? And why are they telling us, you know what, there's nothing to see here, but there is something to see here. Don't worry about anything, but you might need to worry about this. It's not contagious, but it is leprosy. It's a lot of unknowns. This is just something for you to think about. Of course, I told you earlier that there is a beefed up COVID, a new strain of COVID that's out there. And a lot of cases have went up in California. There's cases going up in Denver. We're gearing up for another lockdown. Now, I don't know. I don't know exactly when, but I do know there will be a lockdown sooner than later, which segues me into the next story. And let me just pull it up real quick. This is on CBS this morning, and there's been a big buzz about this. So you get the leprosy in Florida. Cases, 30 cases pop up. We don't know what's going on. Tell us that COVID is coming on strong. Cases are going up. And then this is quite interesting. So let's get into the report, and then we'll talk more about this.
Henrietta Lacks is one of the most important figures in modern medicine you may have never heard of. Before she died of cancer back in 1951, doctors took her cells without her consent, and then they were used in countless medical breakthroughs. but her family was never compensated until now. Yesterday, attorney Ben Crump announced a settlement with a biotech company her family claims profited off of her cells.
This is really interesting. Now I'm going to break it up because I don't want the copyright. So, but we're gonna listen to the rest of this report. I may chop it up here and there just to keep the copyrights off my back. But here we go.
Jerika Duncan has more on her story.
Happy birthday!
Henrietta Lack's family rang in her birthday Tuesday with a present they fought for years to secure, a settlement for an undisclosed amount, cementing her impact on the field of medicine.
My grandmother gave the world a gift 70 years ago, and we're here today to give her a gift of justice.
Now, keep that in mind. This is 70 years ago. Now, I've got more. We're going to talk about this extensively because this is big, and I didn't know about this. I really didn't. Out of all the stuff that they teach in schools that you're supposed to learn, they want to make sure that they put their trans agenda into our students. They want to make sure that our young kids can, be able to pick their gender. Disgusting. But I digress. But they won't teach this. They won't tell us about this.
Doctors at Baltimore's Johns Hopkins Hospital harvested Lack's cells without her knowledge in 1951, a practice they've insisted was common at the time. But after she died, her cells would become the first human ones to be grown and replicated outside the body. Now known widely as HeLa cells, combining the first two letters of her first and last name, they've contributed to the development of vaccines for everything from polio to COVID and to Nobel Prize-winning cancer research.
And it doesn't, here's the thing. I didn't know about this until today, but I'm gonna research more about Henrietta Lacks because there's a lot of questions that I have. But there is a such thing, it's called predictive programming. And there is, when you have these pandemic movies or genetic strain movies, and you always have to go for patient zero. Who's patient zero? That's the first person that it started with. Who is patient zero? And why are their cells so different? And then there was there's actually a movie or a TV show that I finished up, and I haven't played the game, but it's entitled The Last of Us. And The Last of Us pretty much there is this spore. Now, I'm trying to get it right. It has to deal with mushrooms. And if I'm ruining it for you, I apologize. Go and watch it. I won't ruin it. It's a pretty decent television series outside the Letters Mafia agenda that's embedded in there. But overall, it's a pretty good series. But it centers around an outbreak of, I'm going to say spores, but it has something to do with, anyway, let's just call it spores. I don't want to lose you too far. But there is one young lady that it's not affecting her. For whatever reason, it is not affecting her. And so they want to take her blood, study it. That's predictive programming. And this was done 70 years ago. 70 years ago that they took this young woman's cells. But let's keep on because, like I said, this is going to take a somewhat of a deep dive.
Lack's family accused biotech company Thermo Fisher of making billions in profits from innovations tied to her cells. In a statement Tuesday, the company said the parties are pleased that they were able to find a way to resolve this matter outside of court.
Today certainly was poetic justice.
It needs to, quote, do right by Lack's.
A lot of people just think of the HeLa cell as a cell and a product, but she was a woman. She was a mother, a grandmother.
Alfred Carter is one of Lack's grandchildren.
People know that what happened to Henrietta Lacks was wrong, but we're all here together to make things right.
For CBS Mornings, I'm Jerika Duncan.
I'm glad they've gotten compensation for this. And I just wanted to show you that video because it showcases that they got compensation. They got some sort of monetary justice. However, there's a lot of questions. And there's a lot of questions whenever Oprah gets involved. Now, I'm going to show you this trailer. I'm not going to talk because it is a movie trailer. But if you get a moment, I'm going to watch it. But here's the trailer for the HBO biopic that was made in 2017 about Henrietta Lacks. And then we're going to continue to talk more about this.
For years, it seemed like a dream. About our mother, could this be true? What you don't understand is, we didn't know nothing about nothing.
Scientists have been trying to...
Question.
I want to write a book about your mother.
Go healer, go healer. That's my mother. Hope I don't regret this.
Everyone's saying Henrietta Lacks donated themselves. She didn't donate nothing. They took them and didn't ask.
The hospital is guilty, and somebody's going to pay.
God wanna have a disease cure, he provide one for himself.
I don't know, Rebecca.
I'm not doing anything behind your back. Henrietta helped develop the AIDS cocktail, chemotherapy treatments.
It's hard not to get caught up in hope when you've been powerless for so long. I know I'm a part of you, and you're a part of me.
Okay, that was in 2017. That's the trailer. You can go back. You can go back and take a look at it. Take a look at the movie. I definitely am. I'm gonna check it out. But again, there's so many questions involved with this. Let's see. And what we're gonna do? Actually, we're going to. I'm going to show you another video. It's going to give you a quick little synopsis of the questions that I have and that we all should be asking. Number one, what's so special about Henrietta Lacks's genetic cells? How are they able to be replicated? Wait a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back it up. Let me back it up a little bit.
Henrietta Lacks was an African-American woman who lost her life to cancer, but the cells of her tumor became the source of the HeLa strain, which aided in a number of medical advancements. She was born on August 1st, 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia. At 21, she married David Day Lacks and moved to Baltimore shortly after with their 2 children. They would go on to have 3 more. Then, in January of 1951, the 30-year-old mother of 5 experienced abnormal bleeding and tremendous pain in her uterus. It was confirmed that she had cervical cancer, so Henrietta went through radiation and treatment for nearly a year. But the tumor was aggressive and caused her an indescribable amount of pain. So the doctors took a piece of it to biopsy and then cut off a second piece to send to a Dr. George Guy.
Okay, let's just back this up a little bit because there was a lot in what she just said. So, let's go ahead and listen to this again because I got questions. And once we listen to it, I'll share with you those questions that maybe we can find answers together from fiction, reality from fiction, and to see if the government lies to us or not. Well, we know they lie, but at what degree and at what extent?
It was confirmed that she had cervical cancer, so Henrietta went through radiation and treatment for nearly a year. But the tumor was aggressive and caused her an indescribable amount of pain.
Okay, so we know that she contracted cervical cancer and she went through radiation treatment. That, to me, sparks the question of, okay, her cells are able to be reproduced. Did the radiation have something to do with that? I'm really I'm really trying to process this because the CBS report talked about the financial gain. I actually watched another report that I didn't show you where, of course, they brought up the race issue. Oh my goodness, it's racial. How could they do this? See, this is the reason that black people have been oppressed. And this is why, black people are black people and us as black people. And it's like, no. I hear what you're saying, but let's not do that. What's going on a cellular level?
So the doctors took a piece of it to biopsy and then cut off a second piece to send to a Dr. George Guy, a researcher with the institution. And on October 4th, 1951, she died at the age of 31, leaving behind 5 children, including a 15-month-old daughter. But meanwhile, at Dr. George Guy's lab, Guy and many other researchers at the time from other institutions were attempting to grow human cells in a dish. But every time they tried, the cells died. The cells from Henrietta Lacks's tumor didn't die. In fact, they thrived, doubling in size every 24 hours.
Bro, when I first heard that part, I'm sitting here freaking out. The chills, actually, the hairs on my arms started to stand up because if her cells are doubling every 24 hours, you do the math. She's been dead since 1951. They're still replicating. Her cells are still being replicated at an astonishing rate. What are they not telling us?
Which he called the HeLa strain. HE from Henrietta and LA for Lax. So eventually, her cells were in hundreds of labs. These cells were then infected with the polio virus, and scientists were able to test Jonas Salk's vaccine. But it wasn't just polio. Her cells contributed.
Which, when I heard Jonas Salk's, I'm sitting here going, you gotta be kidding me. Jonas Salk's was responsible for the polio vaccine. Later, he tested it on a bunch of children called the polio pioneers, I think, something like that. And he was able to cure polio, which raised some questions for me because I'm sitting there going, did you test on actual patients before you did this? The answer is no. He used the HeLa strain. This HeLa strain has been around for decades, that they're able to test viruses, vaccines on this strain. A lot of questions here. And it's in hundreds of labs. She didn't say it's now in 15 labs. Hundreds.
To salmonella treatment, HIV treatment, gene mapping, cancer treatments, HPV vaccines, just to name a few. And all of this went on without a word to her family. That is, until the 1970s. See, the HeLa strain was extremely aggressive. It had been contaminating other non-HeLa strains in the labs. So scientists, in order to sort the strains out, reached out to her family for blood samples. But when they reached out, the scientists didn't do a very good job explaining the whole situation. They made it sound like they'd cloned Henrietta with...
Conspiracy moment. Maybe I should have a sound bite. And I'm chopping it up right now. I'm going to put on parts. Go to my Patreon channel and sign up. I'm going to watch They Clone Tyrone and give you a commentary on that. But it's funny that they said, okay, the scientists didn't do a very good job because we think that Henrietta Lacks has been cloned. I'm going to say she has been cloned. Don't have proof. Complete speculation. Maybe I'm wacko. Maybe I'm not. I don't trust these scientists.
Out her permission, and that there were Henriettas out there living in the world. Unsurprisingly, that was really unsettling to her family. On top of that, much of this research was happening in for-profit labs, using clones of their mother's cells. Her genome, too, was published online in 2013 without her family's permission, raising a laundry list of ethical questions about research patients and their genetic material.
So, I'm going to share this with you. This is some personal information, but I don't care. I don't care, because I think more people need to be aware of this. When the whole C-19, the COVID-19 thing started, at my place of employment, I'm not going to tell you that. This is, I enjoy doing what I'm doing, but I do have a daytime job. At my place of employment, I'm not vaccinated. I'm not vaccinated. I will not take the vaccine. I don't trust the vaccine. Yeah, I'm just not doing it. Not enough research. I'm just not taking it. Well, there came a time to where I had to test every week before I started working. So I test, and it wasn't like a swab test or a COVID-19 test. This was a genetic test. And when I say genetic test, I say that because the test had to go to a genetic lab, not a hospital or someone that says, okay, let's test it. You got it. You don't. No, it wasn't that. I had to spit in a tube, and I had to send it to a genetic lab for testing. Now, I did that out of fear. I didn't want to lose my job at the time, but I was not taking the vaccine. I just wasn't. And that's my own personal choice. I don't fault anyone who took the vaccine. I am not pointing fingers. You do what's right for you. I did what was right for me. But I questioned that. I'm like, why is my sample being sent to a genetic lab? Now, during the whole thing, this is not a flex, but I didn't get sick. I didn't. The whole COVID time, I didn't get sick. So, me saying that is I voluntarily gave up my DNA sample. They probably tested it. Why is this dude not getting sick? So, going back to the Henrietta Lacks thing, her family unequivocally did not know that they took her cells. Why would they? Why would they tell her? Why would they tell the family? I mean, and we're giving this stuff up freely, myself included. They are testing on us. Maybe not you personally, but they are testing the population. The Tuskegee experiment that they did. It's all under the guise of, hey, we're going to give you free hospital care. And at the time, that was huge. It was huge. Really? You're going to give us free health care? Absolutely. We'll go ahead and test. But all the places that you have been, and the reason that I shared that is because sometimes we give up our DNA samples all the time. What do they do with our blood work? Real talk. That's a real question. When you go to Kaiser, because every now and again I got to go get blood work more because, I'm in my 50s. What do you do with that blood work? Where is that going? Oh, Miss Miller, we go ahead and dispose of it. You tell me you dispose of it, but where?
But at least now.
But where do you dispose of it, and what do you do with it? What tests are you running? What are you really looking for? We don't know. We don't know. They could be using yours. Wow.
All her name is known. Johns Hopkins and many other research institutions have publicly recognized Lack's contribution. Went on to save more people than we can count, perhaps most notably saving women across the world from the very same disease that killed her. And for that, We owe her a great deal.
Okay, that was the little biography of Henrietta Lacks. Like I said, I'm going to watch the 2017 HBO movie with Oprah Winfrey. But that is amazing to me. So now we're going to get into a little bit more deeper dive. This is from Democracy Now! Rebecca Skloot is the reporter, and she goes into depth about this. It's now, we're 51 minutes into the cast. How about this? Let's do this. Let's take a quick little break before I start going crazy here and talking your ears off some more. I do appreciate you guys hanging around and being a part of this and watching this live broadcast. It means the world to me. And if you want to help keep this channel growing, one of the ways you can do this, and this is tremendous, is just share the channel. Share it with someone. Say, hey, check him out. You know, and if you like it, thumbs up it, all that good stuff. It helps the algorithms. But let's take a break, and then we'll come back. We're going to get into the documentary about Henrietta Lacks, as reported by Rebecca Skloot. You guys, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. Go get something to drink real quick, and we'll be back soon.
Break it up. Break it up. Break it up. Break it up. Break it up.
All right, welcome back to the Thomas Miller Show. I do appreciate it. You guys are awesome. Let me get you back here. And we are back. Yeah, I think what I'm gonna do when we take a break is I'm gonna put the little timer up there and have a designated break time, maybe about 2 or 3 minutes, and then that way when to come back and sit down and listen to the show, or do what you do, continue to do what you do. However you listen to the show, it's great. I appreciate it. It's great. It's great. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. That's my Kevin Hart impression. Remember, the socials are there for you to use at your convenience. No pressure. Be a part of the show. You can call me inside the studio, my bedroom that identifies as a broadcast studio, 562-337-9619, or you can send me an email, thomasmiller@thomasmillershow.com. It is greatly appreciated. All right, so we are going to get into this Rebecca Sloot little bit more deeper dive into the life of Henrietta Lacks. And the questions, if you're just now joining, the questions are, what happened to her cells? Why are her cells being able to live for all of these years in a Petri dish? This is amazing. We know that her cells have been influential in polio and other diseases to find cures or remedies. It's been responsible for the AIDS cocktail. Wow. It's almost like this is out of a superhero, a Marvel comic book, to where the radiation hit her cells, causing them to be genetically altered forever, which gives us the immortal cell, because that's one of the nicknames for Henrietta Lacks' cells, is they're immortal, the first ever immortal cells that continue to live and thrive and are aggressive. Unbelievable. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start playing this Rebecca Sloot report.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue our conversation with Rebecca Sloot, because this week, Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, has just named a building after Henrietta Lacks. They were there with the Lacks family members.
To me, whenever companies and institutions do things like this, let's just be honest. You know what, Thomas? Be nice. Don't do that, Thomas. Be nice. Stop looking at the bad in all people. You know what, Self? You're right. You're right, Self. I need to accept that sometimes people want to do good. That's it. That's it, Thomas. But can I question Self? Can I put the question out there to the people, Self? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you, Self. Here's my question. Are they throwing the Lacks family a bone here? Trying to get off with as less money as they can? Hey, we're going to throw you a bone. Have a conversation with myself.
Of the Lacks family. And today we're going to talk about a woman who you may have never heard of, or maybe you just heard about her name because this book has been on the bestseller list for so many years, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Rebecca, it's great to have you. Stay with us. Can you talk about how you discovered the story?
Yeah, I learned about the cells when I was 16 in a basic biology class. Most people do. My teacher, he talks about the HeLa cells and all the amazing things they'd done for science. And then he happened to know her name. Most people actually at that point in time knew her as Helen Lane, which was a fake name basically that was put out connected to the cells. And he wrote Henrietta Lacks on the board in big letters and just said she was a black woman, and that was it. And I went up to him after class and I was like, what else do we know about her? And did she have any kids? And what do they think about all this? And he just said, sorry, no one knows anything. And
I think that's done on purpose. The less that people know about where these cells come from, the less that they're held accountable and the less that they have to divulge. Like, what about the cells? What causes them to do this? Were they mutated? How many of these cells do you have? What's the process? What do you feed the cells? Like, what's going on? Is there consciousness in the cells? If these cells are injected, why are these cells injected into all of these vaccines and, cocktails or whatever? What's the deal with these cells? And when you put a Jane Doe type of stamp on those cells, it's like, okay, well, it's just a black woman. Okay.
I just became obsessed with this question of who this woman was and what happened, and why we didn't know. It seemed so
and you were in high
kind
school.
of inconceivable to me. I was in high school at the time, and then I didn't actually become a writer until much later. And it was actually the first story I ever wrote in an undergraduate elective writing class was about her and the fact that I was sort of obsessed with this question, and it just stuck with me ever since.
So talk about how you reached out to the family. So you have almost no resume here on writing when you reach out to them. And you have to convince them, that you were writing an article or that you were going to write a book?
So, so I'm putting two and two together here. So I showed you the Oprah Winfrey trailer for this Henrietta Lacks. There's this reporter, and she's like, I want to write a book. This is the reporter that was in that trailer. I'm putting two and two together.
Book on their grandmother.
Yeah, and I did, and I was at that point. I thought I was writing a book really about Henrietta and her cells. I had no idea what had happened to her family, and I tracked down her children, and I talked to her husband and called her daughter Deborah, and Deborah was so excited to talk to me, and she kept saying, oh, well, this would be amazing, because then people would learn who my mother was and what she did for science. But then she said, but how do I know you're really a writer and you're not just pretending to be one to steal my cells? And I was like, what? And that was the first kind of hint that, wait a minute, something happened to this family. Why would anyone think that I would be pretending to be a journalist? And, and then it took about a year to convince her to talk to me. For a lot of good reasons. A lot of people had come along wanting something from the Lacks family at that point connected to the cells, particularly white people, and it had never worked out well for them.
Okay, so that's where the race thing comes in. And, that's a natural thing. I think, again, I'm going to stand firm on the statement that I made earlier, that this is much bigger than race. There's something, pardon the pun, on a cellular level that we need to ask questions about, not discounting the fact that this was a woman, a mother, a grandmother, a wife, quite possibly a sister. Absolutely. But what is going on? Even scientists were saying that the cell is being aggressive to other cells. It's dominating other cells, that they had to reach out to the family. So now you've got scientists reaching out to this family, and then you've got this reporter reaching out to this family.
And so it took a long time for me to win her trust and sort of get her to go on this journey with me, which she wanted to do, but was sort of afraid to do.
Well, talk for your remarkable book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, for example, the Tuskegee experiment.
I mentioned that earlier, the world famous Tuskegee experiment done on a bunch of, I believe, enlisted black men. But I'll let her explain the Tuskegee experiment, because she would have had to do research on that to gain the trust of the Lacks family to write a book.
Yeah, there's a long history of black people being used in research without their consent in this country. And one of the most famous examples of that is the Tuskegee syphilis studies, though it had been happening in the slavery era, and beyond.
I believe
and
that.
The Tuskegee studies were sort of one of the most unethical things I think that's probably happened in science in the United States. Hundreds of black men were essentially studied. They had syphilis, and they were studied to watch how syphilis killed you from infection to death, and they weren't offered treatment even when treatment was available. So at a certain point, you could have cured this with antibiotics, and they weren't given the option and didn't know that they were part of this experiment. And so it was at the end of that. There was actually, a lot of press surrounding that, and it did a tremendous amount of damage to trust within sort of, Black communities when it comes to science and medical, getting medical care. So that's just one in a long line of sort of stories in history. And Henrietta's story, has been that within certain areas where people know about her, like in East Baltimore around Hopkins. It's sort of been oral history passed through Black communities.
Okay, so let me stop right there. So I'm going to digress for a moment. We've all heard of Bill Gates, Microsoft dude, left this company, and he's gotten involved with, medical research. I think he's partly responsible for the COVID-19, but that's just my conspiracy theory of mine. But it doesn't just go there. His foundation, the Gates Foundation, remote parts of the world, not just in Africa, and they actually take these vaccines that have been created in his funded labs, and they offer these vaccines as, number one, a vaccine against malaria, in places where malaria is prevalent. But how do we know that he's not just studying these poor people who don't know much? And oh boy, in early America, that's the way the Black community was. A bunch of poor people who don't know much, who are not educated, who are unable to read. I mentioned on one of my shows earlier that back in those times, they didn't want Black people to read because an educated inward to them was dangerous. And let me just digress this a little bit more. That's why here's my plea to people, especially in this day and age. We shouldn't take reading for granted. I used to take reading for granted. I did. I'm like, okay, everyone knows how to read. Big deal. You know how to read. But reading and comprehending what you read, man, that's power. That's power. That's so much power. Not only for you, but your posterity, your community, people around you. It's power. It gives you an edge. And in these communities where reading wasn't a thing, they didn't know what experiments they were giving permission to. How would they read the contracts? Did they even have contracts? And of course, I'm playing Monday morning quarterback, in some cases, hundreds of years later. But you got to, I would have asked for a contract. But who knows if they were educated that they wouldn't have asked for a contract. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying, long story short, don't take reading for granted. Read something every day. So we can stop these unscrupulous people from testing on other people without our educated consent. Anyway, let's continue on. I did a whole digression there. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.
As part of why it's hard to trust science.
So take us back to the early 1950s. Take us back to Henrietta Lacks feeling sick and going to the doctor.
Yeah, so Henrietta, one of the most amazing things to me about this moment is Henrietta actually knew there was something wrong. She just sort of sensed it, and she actually found this tumor herself right on the outside of her cervix, and went to Hopkins and just sort of went in and said, I have this lump and it needs to be looked at. And in that moment, she went to Hopkins because it was the only place where she could go as a Black woman. This was the era of segregation. So there was colored wards and, the white wards in hospitals, and most places didn't have a colored ward, so she couldn't even go. And the thinking at the time was sort of, the people who ended up in what they referred to as the public ward were either black or they were poor and they couldn't afford care. And the thinking was, well, we're giving you free medical care. As payment, we get to do whatever we want with you, essentially. And so there was a lot of...
Man, and you can actually understand. I wouldn't do it. And I think most doctors that take the Hippocratic Oath wouldn't do it. But there are some evil scientists out there. I mentioned Bill Gates. I think he's an evil scientist. I do. I honestly do. I think he's an evil, genius, unscrupulous person. Because I can see somebody saying, okay, well, boom, you know what? Then we're going to use you as a test dummy. We're going to use you as a test subject. Yeah, we'll give you care as long as it serves our purpose. And it's just not for black people that they treated. It was, like she said, it was a public ward. This is what they think of the general public. I'm getting heated up. Calm it down, Thomas, because you're getting heated up. Okay, self, thank you for reminding me. But this is how they treat the general public. They don't care about us. They want to use us. Let me digress just for a little bit. I came across a story this morning, and I was going to talk about it, but then this Henrietta Lacks topic came up, and it just consumed me all day. But the report was there's a hospital that is taking poor patients who can't afford health care, who don't have insurance, who are homeless, and they are literally taking them outside off hospital premises and dumping them onto the street. They took a elderly lady who couldn't afford anything, and she was white. So Hispanic, black folks, Asian, American Indians, don't think it just happens to us. It happens to poor white folks too. If you can't afford care, they will dump you on the side of the road quicker than you can say hot potato, and they will just dump you there and leave you in 32-degree weather, and they will just cover you up. This is how they treat poor people. They don't care about us. And so I can see this hospital, getting back to the Henrietta Lacks, I can see this hospital saying, okay, we're going to give you care, but we're going to do what we want with whatever part of your body that we want to work with, essentially.
A lot of research that was conducted in these wards that people didn't know about at the time. And so Henrietta showed up. She ended up going under anesthetic to get this biopsy of her cervix, and that's when the doctor just took a little extra piece and put that in a dish and sent it to George Guy, who was, the head of tissue culture research and had been trying to grow cells for decades.
And what happened then?
These cells.
And they never died. So her cells...
And most cells die?
They'd been able to keep cells alive... so they'd been able to keep cells alive for maybe 24 hours in the past, but hers just not immediately. George Guy started telling other scientists who'd been trying to grow cells, and they all said, can we have some? And he would give them to them, and they pretty quickly spread around the world this way.
Okay, let me... Now, I admit, this might be a little far-fetched. But follow me here. I noticed that she didn't say human cells. She just said cells. They were unable to keep cells. Now, I'm thinking these were human cells because they're dealing with a hospital with human patients, so I'm hoping they're human cells that they exclusively work with. Where are you going with this, Thomas? Here's where I'm going. I did a story a couple of months ago. Did a podcast talking about genetically grown meat from cells. Now, if they're talking to other scientists, say, hey, we got these cells that'll grow. Oh, okay. Just go with it, Thomas. Just let them have it. They now can take cells and grow chicken, beef, and pork and give us food. What if they initially could not keep the animal cells alive to grow the food? Now, earlier in this, we know that Henrietta's cells are in hundreds of labs. What if some of her cells are in these labs that genetically grow food as well? Because her cells are the immortal cells, and maybe just a little piece would be enough to enhance the growth of the animal cells. Now, we're not growing animals, we're just making a glob of meat per se. This is how my brain works. You got to question everything, people, and this is the reason why I question everything. And I admit, this one is a conspiracy. But in the movie Soylent Green, he's like, they're eating people. Soylent Green is people. What if Henrietta's cells are contributing to growing meat? Most of it's animal, but there's that added extra oomph from the Gila strain to boost the production of this meat. And then you get a diluted version of Soylent Green. Thomas, let's come back to Earth. Let's go to reality.
All while they were actually spreading in Henrietta's body at the same time, and she died very, very quickly after.
Why didn't the cells die?
This is a question.
Yeah, this is a question that has been asked many times, and up until very recently, the answer was we didn't really know. They thought maybe it was because she actually had syphilis, and that can cause cancer to grow more rapidly. So there were sort of questions about whether that was the cause. But I know earlier in the segment, we talked about the fact that the Gila genome had been sequenced and posted online. One of the things that came from that is that scientists were able to identify why her cells grew so fast finally, which is that she had the HPV virus, which is a very common sexually transmitted disease. And the way HPV causes cancer is it inserts itself into your genome, which is, 3 billion letters that sort of make up the alphabet of all your genes. And it's pretty random where it lands and inserts itself. And it sort of scrambles your genes a bit. And depending on where it lands, it can cause cancer or not. And of the 3 billion places where that virus could have landed in her genome, it happened to land sort of on one of the most aggressive tumor genes that it could have. So it just turned on her cancer in this almost like hyperspeed way. And it was literally a 1 in 3 billion chance that it would have happened in that way. So that is now what we know. And it was from this genome that we got that information.
Okay, but you didn't answer my question. So you had the HPV virus. It inserted itself into this cancer virus, which accelerated the growth. Let me go back. Let me go back and let me hear this again, because now I got even more questions.
They thought maybe it was because she actually had syphilis, and that can cause cancer to grow more rapidly. So there were sort of questions about whether that was the cause. But I know earlier in the segment, we talked about the fact that the Gila genome had been sequenced and posted online. One of the things that came from that is that scientists were able to identify why her cells grew so fast finally, which is that she had the HPV virus, which is a very common sexually transmitted disease. And the way HPV causes cancer is it inserts itself into your genome, which is, 3 billion letters that sort of make up the alphabet of all your genes. And it's pretty random where it lands and inserts itself. And it sort of scrambles your genes a bit. And depending on where it lands, it can cause cancer or not. And of the 3 billion places where that virus could have landed in her genome, it happened to land sort of on one of the most aggressive tumor genes that it could have. So it just turned on her cancer in this almost like hyperspeed way. And it was literally a 1 in 3 billion chance that it would have happened in that way.
So again, are these cancer cells? I'm help me in the comment section down below if you can. If you're a doctor, if you are a geneticist, please help a brother out. You're gonna have to help me with this. But why? Why don't her cells die?
So that is now what we know, and it was from this genome that we got that information.
So who is Helen Lane?
Nobody. So Helen Lane was a made-up name. So in the 50s, when the cells grew, they started, contributing to science immediately, and the media got interested. And a reporter went to Johns Hopkins and George Guy and said he wanted to write about this woman, who the cells came from. And Hopkins at that point said, maybe not a good idea to release her name. There weren't the same privacy laws then, but, I think there were questions about protecting her privacy and also about, no one knew about the cells. The family didn't know. And so they released this name, Helen Lane, or someone did, connected to Hopkins. And then there was a lot of mythology around that. There was a while where people thought it was Hedy Lamarr, and basically anyone whose name was H-E-L-A.
Who was an inventor and interested in science herself, so that's interesting.
Yeah, which is, I love that part of it. But Helen Lane stuck, and the story was that she was a white woman. That was often the story that got sort of passed down. And some people said she was George Guy's assistant, and none of that was true.
Why didn't George Guy, when he saw how remarkable this was, these replicating cancer cells, why didn't he tell Henrietta Lacks at the time, say, we've discovered something amazing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And one part of that answer is that George Guy actually never had contact with her. So he was the scientist in the lab, down the hall who was growing cells. And the cells came to him in a dish with, just like this.
100%. He's just a guy who grows cells. I don't care. Give me cells. He's that guy. I'll just take some cells. Give me some cells. If they work, they work. If they don't, they don't. Hers happened to work. So I 100% believe that Mr. Guy was the guy who didn't know anything about Henrietta. I do believe that 100%. Guys, we're going to go a little bit longer. We're going to stop at exactly 1 hour and 30 minutes. You've been awesome. Yeah, so let's keep going.
Abbreviation on them. He knew her name. He was able to get access to her medical records to learn about her if he wanted to. But, he getting cells from anyone who came into the hospital, nearby hospitals, his friends, his family. And so they were all just cells. And that's often the way that science works. By the time, the cells or the genes are in a laboratory, they're no longer connected to a person. And that was sort of one of my intentions in writing this book, was to sort of bring these things together and say, look, cells and genes are used in all research, so much research now, and it's pretty easy to forget that they came from a living, breathing person, and that it's important to keep both of those stories in mind. But yeah, it would have never crossed his mind. It wasn't something that people did, but also, he just didn't ever have contact with her.
So talk about the journey you went on with Henrietta's daughter. What did you need to discover about Henrietta and her family?
Well, everything. And, much more than I expected going in. I really did think I was just writing about the cells. And then once I heard how afraid her daughter was and realized something had happened to her, I understood that I needed to figure out why she was so afraid. And that was what opened up this whole other story that I couldn't have sort of imagined was there, that her children were used in research without their consent in the 70s. Their medical records were released to the press and published. They had, a person come along pretending to be a lawyer who claimed he was going to sue Hopkins, who ended up suing them. And they had just had so many things happen to them. And in order to understand, to sort of win Deborah's trust, I needed to understand that and learn her story. But also it was clear to me she didn't know anything about her mother and desperately wanted to. And I sort of realized that if I could find out who Henrietta was, that sharing that information with Deborah would help her trust me, because in the end, we both just wanted the same thing. We were sort of the two people in the world who were obsessed with this question of who was Henrietta, and it took a while for her to believe that that was really what I was after.
So where did you go?
And so I would go.
And what trees did you shake to get information?
Yeah, so initially
Okay, so this goes into her life, which is very important. But of course, if you want to know more about this Henrietta Lacks, which I'm definitely going to watch the Oprah. And if Oprah's involved, I question her motives. I'm just not a fan of Oprah Winfrey. I'm just not. She's not a good person. But anyway, I'm going to watch the show about her, Henrietta Lacks. It's a fascinating story. I'm not done with the story because there's more questions. And I think this is the reason why John Hopkins, the scientists involved, that's why they initially gave the Helen Lane story, is to take the heat off of Henrietta Lacks, because anyone who even remotely cares about where our vaccines come from, how are they being tested on, you got to wonder what's going on with this. And the Gila strain has also been a part of the COVID-19 as early as the COVID-19 vaccine. And I've just got so many questions. When Rebecca was talking about how her cells weren't dying, I don't know if she answered that question. To me, she didn't. Maybe because I'm slow. I don't know. But she didn't answer the question. But if this virus, what would it do in someone else's body? What other traits will it enhance? Man, this is actually huge. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. I do appreciate it. I am going to do more research regarding this. You guys have been absolutely awesome sticking with me this whole hour and a half. I do appreciate it. Remember, I'm always want to hear from you, want to know what's going on, or if there's anything that you would like for me to cover, talk about. But yeah, this is a fascinating story. I'm going to keep on going with this. You guys take care of yourselves. And yeah, we will catch you next time. And yeah, have a good night. There's my socials. They're on the screen. I would love to hear from you. If you like the show, share the show with anyone that will listen. My name's Thomas Miller. I'm out of here.